Or more God.
More God. Okay, okay. He's famous for lots of books. The Russian Debutante's Handbook, which won huge amounts of prizes everywhere. His next book was called Absurdistan, which was in the top 10. The Time magazine put it in its top 10, and so did the New York Times Book Review. And his most recent book is called Super Sad True Love Story, which just won the Woodhouse Prize. Next to Gary is Manu Joseph, who's the editor of Open Magazine. His first book, Serious Men, was shortlisted for the Man Asia Prize. And his latest book, which he has a copy of in his hand, is The Illicit Happiness of Other People, which was described to me by somebody he knows, so I'm not going to embarrass him, as the perfect novel. And when you read it, you will see why. It's a darkly comic tale of life in South India. I come from Sri Lanka, so trust me, he's got it spot on. We're very similar. Okay, these are my three contestants in the beauty pageant. Since some of you may not have read their works, I'm going to ask each of them to read 5 minutes. If it gets boring, scream. 5 minutes from each of them, and then we'll go into to our discussion. Debbie, would you like to start?
Well, it's great to be here. Can you hear me? Is that right? I'm going to read a beginning bit from The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, and what it's describing is an elderly British widow called Evelyn, who's faced with the prospect of being outsourced to India. The book is about how nobody could afford to look after old people in Britain anymore, and so some Indian whiz kid has the idea of outsourcing them to a very rackety old guest house in Bangalore, or Jaipur in the movie. And I just want to read you this passage because it's where Evelyn is faced with the prospect of a retirement in horrible wet old England and the prospect of going to India. And the person who moots this to her is the woman who comes and does her nails, called Beverly. And I'll just read you this couple of pages. Evelyn loved Beverly. Once a week, Beverly visited Leaside, the old people's home, to do yoga and manicures. She was a chatty, affectionate girl and had taken a shine to Evelyn. She kissed her and called her darling and brought a blast of fresh air. Beverly's life was go, go, go. She whizzed around Sussex in her little car, running classes at a dizzying variety of venues. Pilates at the Chichester Meridian Hotel, Mondays. Aerobics and line dancing at the Summerlees Health Club, Tuesdays. St. tanning at the Copthorne, Wednesday evenings. And table decorations for special occasions once a month at the Billingshurst Community Centre. Then there was the acupuncture, which she was learning from a videotape, and her home hairdressing business. Amongst all this, Beverly found time for a packed and disastrous love life. It was no wonder that the arrival of Beverly's yellow Honda, radio blaring, lifted Evelyn's spirits. She tells Evelyn about her latest love rat, and then tells her about how she's heard about this retirement home for Brits in India. Evelyn is a tiny little bit mixed feelings about this. The idea was preposterous, of course. India? It was a big enough kerfuffle just to get herself to Chichester. Evelyn had grown more fearful in her old age. The newspapers carried such alarming stories, biological attacks, rapes and muggings. That very week, according to the Sussex Mercury, somebody had set fire to a litter bin in the cathedral precinct. Beverly, however, thought the idea a hoot and sent off for the brochure. The next week, she sat down in Evelyn's room and opened it. "Look at that house," she said. "You could be in England, except it's sunny." Outside, rain lashed the windows. It had been the wettest August on record. Gales, thunderstorms. The management had had to switch on the central heating. "What's the point of mouldering away in this bloody country?" said Beverly. "How long have you lived in Sussex?" "All my life," said Evelyn. "That's so not adventurous. Isn't it time for a change? After all, what's to keep you here?" It would do you a world of good, Petal, said Beverly. It's never too late, and you're in terrific nick now your hip's better. And if you don't like it, you can always come home. Evelyn roused herself from a reverie. The idea was mad. She gave back the brochure. I couldn't die in a foreign field. Indians don't die, said Beverly. Yes, they do, dear, said Evelyn, all over the place. What I mean is, said Beverly, death's not important. Beverly had learned this from her friend Maureen, who knew more about yoga than she did. When you die, you come back as something else, a woodpecker or something. Why a woodpecker, asked Evelyn. Oh, search me. Until recently, Evelyn had believed in heaven. Now she was drawing nearer to it, she wasn't so sure. It was like someone shoving a page in front of her face. The closer it became, the more blurred the writing. Beverly pointed to a photo in the brochure. That's the doctor at the hotel, Dr. Sajid Rama, he's called. Isn't he gorgeous? He looks like Omar Sharif, said Evelyn. Isn't Omar Sharif about 100 years old, said Beverly. He wasn't always, dear, said Evelyn. Actually, said Beverly, isn't he dead? Evelyn thought suddenly, this life, it's as if I'm dead already. Beverly gazed at the photo. What do you think Omar Sharif would come back as? Himself, but younger, said Evelyn. And staying in the next room. They burst out laughing. Plenty of life left in you, said Beverly, you naughty girl. The thing is, said Beverly dreamily, Indian men are so fit compared to pasty English ones. Honest, you'll feel 10 years younger. This cheered up Evelyn. She picked up the brochure and looked at a photograph. It showed the hotel garden. The place was bathed in a golden light, the light of long afternoons in her childhood garden, now tarmacked over to become the freight terminal at Gatwick Airport. The timeless beauty of India, it said. Time didn't really exist, not with the important things. Evelyn talked to her dead husband in her head. His voice continued, even though he himself had stopped. I remember now, said Beverly, with Hindus you've got to do good deeds, then you come back as something better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Okay, we have Gary up next.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I remember growing up, we had a saying, Rusi Hindi Bahai Bahai. Remember that? I miss socialism. So I'll read from my latest novel. It's called Super Sad True Love Story. And the best thing about the book is its cover. It was designed to appeal to young people in America. So we had a focus group where we brought in some young people and we said, do you want to read a book? And they said, no. And then we said, do you want to read this? And they said, yeah. And then they looked at all the buttons and they said, how do I turn this on? And they just kept pressing them. Anyway, the book is set slightly in the future when a completely illiterate United States is about to fall apart. So next Tuesday or so. The main characters are the Russian-American Lenny Abramov, who's a short, balding Russian Jew. Where do I come up with this stuff, right? And he's the narrator of this section, and he's approaching his 40s. He works for a company called Post-Human Services, which is trying to find a cure for death. And he has a very attractive young Korean-American girlfriend named Eunice Park. And in this scene, Lenny takes Eunice back to meet his parents on Long Island in New York. We took a cab to the corner of Washington Avenue and Myron, the most important corner of my life. I could already see my parents' brownish, half-brick, half-stucco cape, the golden mailbox out in front, the faux 19th century lamp beside it, the cheap lawn chairs stacked on the island of cement that was supposed to be the front porch, and the gigantic flags of the United States and Israel billowing from 2 flagpoles. I felt a little embarrassed because I knew that Eunice's parents were much better off than my own. At the door, my mother appeared in her usual household outfit, white bra and panties. She was about to throw her arms around my neck when she noticed Eunice, let out some Russian garble of amazement, and retreated inside the house, leaving me with the visuals of her thick breasts and white little round of belly. My father, shirtless, soon took her place, also gasped at Eunice, ran his hand against his naked, muscular breasts, said, "Oh," then hugged me. There was hair against my new dress shirt, the great carpet of hair that my father wore with an odd touch of class, as if he were a royal in some tropical country. He kissed me on both cheeks, and I did the same, feeling the instructions, the code of Russian father-son relations. Father means I have to love him, have to listen to him, can't offend him, can't hurt him, can't bring him to task for past wrongs. He's an old man now, defenseless. My mother reappeared in shorts and a wife-beater. "Synochek, little son," she shouted, "look who's come to visit us, nash любимец, our favorite." She shook Eunice's hand, and both of my parents swiftly evaluated her, affirmed that she was like her predecessors, not Jewish, but quietly approved of the fact that she was thin and attractive with a healthy black mane of hair. My mother unwrapped her own precious blonde locks from the green handkerchief that kept them safe from the American sun and smiled prettily at Eunice. She began talking in her brave post-retirement English about how glad she was to have a potential daughter-in-law, filling in the contours of her loneliness with rapid-fire questions about my mysterious life in faraway Manhattan. "Does Lenny keep clean house?" she asked. "Does he vacuum? Once I come to college dormitorium. Oh, awful, such smell, dead ficus tree, old cheese on table, socks hanging in windows." Eunice smiled and spoke in my favor. "He's like very good, Mrs. Abramov," she said. "He's like very clean." I looked at her with love. "I brought Tagamet from the discount pharmacy," I'd said to my father, taking 5 boxes out of the bag I brought. "Thank you, Malinke, my little one," my father said, taking hold of his beloved drug. "I have a peptic ulcer," he said to Eunice, pointing at the depth of his tortured stomach. My mother had already grabbed hold of the back of my head and was madly stroking my hair. "So gray," she said. "So old he gets, almost 40. Lyonya, what is happening to you? Too much stress? Also losing hair. Oh my God." "You are named Eunice," my father said. "Do you know where it comes from, such name?" "Like my parents?" Eunice said. "No, not parents. It's from the Greek, eunike, meaning victorious." He laughed, happy to demonstrate that before he was forced to become a janitor in America, he had served as a quasi-intellectual and minor dandy on Moscow's Arbat Street. "So I hope," he said, "that in life you will be victorious also." "Who cares about Greek, Boris?" my mother said. "Look at how she is beautiful." The fact that my parents admired Eunice's looks and capacity for victory brightened me quite a bit. All these years, and I still craved my parents' approval, still longed for the carrot and stick of their 19th century child-rearing. I instructed myself to lower the heat of my emotions, to think without the family blood bursting at my temples. But I was 12 years old as soon as I passed the mezuzah at the front door. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. And up next is Manu.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Now, this portion in the book is the introduction of a 12-year-old boy who has very low self-esteem. He's a schoolboy in Madras. I suppose that explains that. And the setting is 1990. And what is happening is that the headmaster is in the next classroom thrashing everybody who has failed in maths, physics, and chemistry. Those days you can fail in English and Hindi or the other languages. So he's going to come anytime to Toma Chako's classroom. And Toma Chako is pondering over life. In these circumstances, as he listens to the beatings in the next classroom, Toma Chako feels a liquid gloom in his groin. He considers how hard it is to be a bright person. He imagines the sheer length of human life, the many years ahead of him. He's 12. He has a long way to go. Will Toma make it? Unni had always tried to reassure him. He even said maths was about to get a lot easier. He said the Home Minister, who's responsible for happy homes, would soon pass a law changing the value of pi from 3.14159 to just 3, making it easier for all Indian children to calculate the area of a circle. That is what Uni said, but then it was probably a lie, like the many other things he used to say. Every day, Thoma tries to improve his mind, but he does not possess the power of concentration. He is a wool gatherer. He stares at the open textbook for hours and is distracted by the pain of the parallelogram, which is slanted forever. His nails scratch the page to straighten its tired limbs. It affects him, the great arrogance of the equilateral triangle, the failed aspiration of the octagon to be a circle, and the eternal suffocation of the denominator that has to bear the weight of the unjust numerator, the loneliness of Pluto, and the smallness of Mercury, always a mere dot next to the yellow sun. In this world, there is no respect for Mercury. Every day, Thoma tries to memorize interesting facts, but his head is porous. There are only 2 impressive facts he knows. For some reason, they have stuck in his head. The full form of KGB, which is... Can you pronounce this for me?
Комитет государственной безопасности.
Whatever that is. And Pele's real name, which is Edson Arantes do Nascimento. Every day, Thoma hopes a miracle will occur, and Maithili Balasubramaniam will ask him, Thoma, what does KGB stand for? And I wonder if Pele is his real name. But miracles do not happen in Thoma's life, even though he's Christian. The thought of his bleak future brings the apparition of a woman to his mind. She has black, decaying teeth. It is his future wife. A fate foretold to all the boys who are not very clever, which is true in Madras, actually. But when he becomes a man, he wants a pretty wife. She would have long braided hair. She would be in a red cotton sari and a tight blue blouse, and she would be somewhat scared of him. On the days of sorrow, she would put her nervous head on his shoulder and cry inaudibly, and just for a few moments, not long. He would never beat her. He would speak to her with respect. He would treat her well. He would never penetrate her. It is improbable that Thoma will be thrashed today because he has not failed in any subject in the monthly test. Somehow he usually manages to pass, barely pass, but there is always a chance that something can go wrong. They always pick on something he has written in the test, mistakes that he does not fully comprehend. For example, his answer to the question, if the base of the triangle is 3.87 centimeters and its height is 5.13 centimeters, can you find its area? Of course I can, Thoma had written. A slap for that. He does not know why. Then there was this laughably easy question, which living thing makes its own food? Gloria Miss had caned his palm several times. Not Mariama Chaco, you idiot. Not Mariama Chaco. Which living thing is your mother a thing? The correct answer was plants, she said, which is absurd. Science is hard because it cannot be fully understood. It can only be accepted, like catechism. Maybe he should become a writer, but writing is hard too. As a writer, Thoma must write like this: he faced the western winds. But how would Thoma know if a wind is a western wind? It terrifies him that even writers must know a set of facts, that even writers must have information. Thoma does have information, but it always turns out to be wrong information, as opposed to right information which is useful. What is the opposite gender of ram? It is amazing that every person in the class had got the answer right, as if everybody had copied from a single source. You. That was the answer, you? How do people in Madras know such facts? Thoma's answer was Sita.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now tell me, are you all this funny in real life?
No, I'm very sad in real life.
Well, that's not what the Financial Times said. The Financial Times said that you are bright and lively and you float in real life. Well, maybe not quite in those words, but Debbie, what about you? Are you miserable in real life?
No, I'm very shallow and jolly.
And Manu?
I don't know. When I was much younger, all the girlfriends used to say, I mean, you're funny. But what's happened now after marriage? I miss that compliment. A wife never says her husband is funny, which is bizarre. Is it because they are smarter than girlfriends? So I don't know what it is.
Let's talk about this humor. Now, of the three of you, it seems to me, Gary, your work has a kind of like take no prisoners type of humor. I think, Debbie, yours is kind of much gentler, and yours is kind of in a slightly otherworldly way.
What does that mean?
Well, yeah.
Why can't you just give me a straight compliment?
Yeah, no. It is a compliment. There's a kind of a sort of magical realism to your work, I feel.
Absolutely not.
Well, there you are. See how wrong you can be. But I mean, Gary, you are so wicked about Koreans. I mean, do they allow you to exist in America now?
My Korean wife does not allow me to exist in America.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The big problem is always with my father, because every time I write a book, he says, will it be good for the Jews? And I say, I don't think it'll be good for Jews, Koreans, Gujaratis. Nobody's going to come out well from this book. So it's very hard. I have to please him very much.
Yeah.
Just as in the passage that I read.
I mean, how far do you all go in terms of your wickedness? Are there kind of no-go areas, or is it a no-holds-barred kind of thing with comedy? Debbie?
Well, I think, and this may be sort of vaguely what this is about, I don't know, but I think that there is no situation where there is not humour. And I think that people divide comic novels into comic novels. I know, famously since Howard Jacobson won the Booker Prize, Howard Jacobson, who's here at the festival, people used to bracket comic novels in a sort of genre, which they shouldn't be in, because life is just so ironic and strange and weird. I mean, I'll give you an example. I went to see that film Amour, which is released in the UK. I don't know if it's come out here. It's about an elderly couple, and she has a stroke and they're dying. It is harrowing. Actually, my mother had dementia for 2 years, and it was extremely harrowing, but it was also very funny at the same time. And I think that if one weaves that in, I was thinking of the example of her, for instance. She had a clock that on each hour there was a different bird, because she likes birds. And so she was going quietly round the bend, and at 2 o'clock, a cuckoo would go cuckoo, cuckoo at 2 o'clock, and then it would be a chaffinch at 3 o'clock. It was weird and strange and funny. It wasn't just relentlessly tragic. And I think that if one writes relentlessly tragically, people don't get the humanity. I mean, I adapted Anne Frank's diary for television. You can't get sadder than that, but actually, Anne Frank's diary is full of life and jokes, and that makes it all the more moving.
But are there areas that you fear to go to? I mean, even if they're funny, do you feel you might upset your audience so much that you just don't want to broach it? Manu? Yes.
Absolutely not. It's. I don't think you can be cautious and also write anything meaningful at the same time. And I think it's absolutely all right to offend people. And I'm from a country which is desperate to be offended all the time. In fact, I'm here today and tomorrow on these 2 dry days, actually, and I'm leaving day after. Which
Whoa, dry days?
Yeah, these 2 are dry days, actually.
Oh my God.
But grass
heard
is
it
okay,
here.
actually. I think drugs are fine. I think it's only for liquor.
Thank you.
Yeah, so maybe because I grew up in a country which was taking offense at just about everything else, I think I developed a personality which just didn't care anymore.
Do you get kind of hate mail? Do people come and say, "How dare you write about this"?
Yeah, of course. I mean, a lot of them from NRI nuts, guys, I mean, the guys who grew up in Madras, cracking all these exams, and then they go to America and they feel that quantitative ability is not good enough, and they search for a greater meaning, and they find nationalism and patriotism, and they get offended by just about anything that you have to say about India. It's like, I live here, why don't you come here and be patriotic, which is very difficult.
Gary, what about you? Is there anything in America that you can't write about, or Russia for that matter?
Well, writing in Russia is very exciting, and writing in America is very exciting because there's no audience. Nobody reads books. So you can write whatever the F you want. In America, we're a nation of writers, not readers. We have 17 million writers and 600,000 readers. So each one has maybe a tenth of a reader. I'm a big writer because I have a whole woman who reads my books in Boston. She's 83 years old, and I'm worried that after she dies, I will have no readership. So yeah, in America, you can write whatever you want. In Russia, of course, everyone takes offense. And so my last book, the main newspaper's headline, the review was, "Balding Traitor Betrays Motherland." And that was the positive review.
Why is it that writing humorously or comic writing, now I know we shouldn't really make the distinction as Debbie said, why is it that it's considered faintly disgraceful? I mean, if you can't become a doctor, lawyer, or an accountant, you become a comic writer. Well, why are we considered low class in this way? Any ideas?
Well, I think one of the things about jokes is you are avoiding facing the truth. That's what jokes do. And yet they also tell the truth. But I think that people think that if you make jokes, you're actually sidestepping. I mean, I don't know if you agree, but it's sort of sidestepping reality. That's what people think. In England, it's like that. English people joke all the time because we're incredibly sexually repressed, inhibited, embarrassed by everything. So we just make jokes about it all the time. Think of lovely P.G. Wodehouse. His name came up.
I think we have to understand the true nature of the bore, Bores are not just men, chiefly men, but they're also a fellowship, So they come together and give very serious awards so that they can preserve the art of boring people. And it is called literary fiction or art or something like that. Basically, it's the fellowship of arts. And as Deborah said, life is filled with humor, and if you are a writer, you have to be automatically funny, and if you're not being funny, I think you have serious psychiatric problems, or you're just one of those bores, who is searching to sustain this art of boring people.
I think that, yes, Manu was saying that, I think there is a distinction between seriousness and solemnity, and a lot of writers, because I do some teaching of writing, and a lot of people who are trying to write confuse the two, and they think that if you're solemn, you're writing profound stuff. It is so not true. If you're serious, you can be extremely funny, but seriousness and solemnity are two different things, I think.
See, there's a word that the Fellowship of Bores have created, if you look at it very carefully, as a journalist, as an editor, there's this new word which has crept in, which is inaccessible prose. And inaccessible prose is supposed to be some great work of fiction. Well, actually what they're saying is, boss, this is going to bore you. But it's important to us that this exists because we need to do something.
Now, is it difficult? Is more difficult to write comedy, in other words? I mean, do you have to work the comedy into your serious stuff? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
It's so hard. I mean, I don't even write these books anymore. I outsource them to India. There's this guy, Akhil something in Hyderabad, who writes most of this shit. But when I used to write them myself, it was very hard.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I think the danger is that if you think of a really funny line or great joke, the danger is you push the characters and the scene because you're just dying to write the punchline. And that always shows, and it's always laboured, the good comedy comes organically out of the characters. And when you're on a roll, his friend in Hyderabad, who's I've heard is very assiduous.
Yes.
Yes, when he's on a roll, which is quite often, the jokes come, and that is heaven. Doesn't happen very often, but just occasionally it does.
Tell me about the sense of timing. I mean, do you sort of write that sentence and it is funny? Do you then tweak it? Is it important to get it just right, or does it just come naturally?
Well, what I do is, and I think a lot of people who actually write film do this, I read everything out loud, and I try to act out all the different characters.
Including the Korean?
Including the Korean, which my wife watches me do it and gives me yes or no. I also took an acting class with Woody Allen's first wife, Louise Lasser, to help me write better. And she said, it was very interesting, so I tried to do all these acting techniques, and she said to me, "You're fake and manipulative." And I said, "I live in New York, what do you want?" But I think she had a point there.
Tell me about this thing about films. I mean, is it every writer's dream to have their book turned into a film? I mean, Debbie, with super exotic Marigold Hotel, did that really kind of completely change your writing life in any way?
Well, I've adapted a lot of my books for television, about
Yes.
6 or 7 books, so I've done quite a lot of screenwriting, and I've done quite a lot of film scripts, most of which don't get done. So I'm sort of used to it, and the interesting thing about that is that you do have a muscle in your head, which is a screenwriting muscle, and you do see scenes in terms of dialogue and moving the story on. I mean, I think of the difference, the novel's like a noun and the film script is like a verb. It has to push stuff along. Novel, Nicholson Baker famously wrote a novel, do you remember The Mezzanine, which was a man in his lunch hour in New York looking for a pair of shoelaces, and he didn't even buy them. That was the whole novel. The whole novel was just what was going on in his head in his lunch hour. It was heaven, and extremely funny, actually. Nicholson Baker is funny, but nothing happened.
It brings me to mind your writing, Manu. I mean, when I said magical realism, I meant there is a lot of kind of fantasy there, although it's very deeply rooted in realism. I mean, how difficult would that be to make a film out of?
I think it'll be very easy. I've been trying to tell a lot of people just that, but
If there's any director out there.
yeah, and this is this strange thing called optioning. Everybody comes and options something. It sounds good, but it just means that they want to lock up your novel for 2 years, and at the end of it say, "Sorry, this can't be a film." So that's what optioning means, and it's happened to me a few times. But I think it'll be very easy. But because it's so money intensive, I think most of the novels don't end up becoming a film, and then they need to be mainstream somehow for people to go and watch. A lot of complications. But I think it'll be very easy to make a film out of my books, I would claim, because the fundamental, the flow chart of my novels are usually screenplays. I've also written a film, though it took me 30 minutes into the film to recognize that I wrote it. But yes, I'm not surprised at all that a lot of novelists would like to see their novels become films.
Gary, what about you?
Yeah, I'm working on an adaptation of this for television, for Super Sad, for
Okay.
television also, like every other writer I know. But Hollywood is a funny place because it's all about demographics, so they'll say, "Can you make this character 30% less Russian and maybe make this character 5% more Sri Lankan, if you don't mind?" So you're constantly trying to balance the ethnicity of your characters. In the end, they're just all Jewish.
But I think also what's wonderful if you get high caliber actors and they earn every penny is that they bring something to the part when they understand it. And in The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, for instance, those of you who've seen it, there's just a moment where Bill Nye is trying to make a phone work, and he's just shaking it and rattling it about. It's a nothing scene. It's heaven. It's just heaven, because it's Bill Nye trying to make a phone work, and he has a whole shtick, and it's wonderful. And so when good actors run with the ball and with the character, they'll make one's often quite threadbare screenplay, or not particularly funny screenplay, incredibly funny. The opposite can happen. They can deaden it by being complete crap. But in this case, there were rather high caliber actors, so they made things funnier. Great.
Tell me about tragedy. Now, is tragedy necessary for comedy? Yes. We would
Why
be
me?
here all night. We could be here all night discussing this.
Me?
But yeah.
What
I
about
mean, do you
him? Let
think-
him answer her.
All right. Yeah.
Manu.
Shall I rephrase that? Shall I say, is it possible to write comedy without having any tragic undertones? Is that possible?
No, I don't think so. I think most of the time, what is called comedy works because there's an element of truth in it, and the writer has tried to be accurate. In fact, you take stand-up comedy. If this guy is not accurate, it's not going to be funny at all. He's spot on. That's why he or she is funny. So I think the strongest humor derives from reality, so you can't avoid tragedy, that heaviness. See, there's a distinction between something which is just flippant or frivolous and what we mean by the comic novel, actually. So yes, it's something which increases the stake of the plot of the story, so it's something which is significant. You can't run away from it. There is something sad about most humorous novels.
What about?
Actually, I've just had another thought listening to Manu, which is that I was thinking of it the other way round, because I adapted Pride and Prejudice, as Ashok was saying, and I thought the opposite was the case in that I thought it wasn't a frothy comedy of social manners. I thought that to get the comedy out, really to get the comedy to matter, it should really matter. It's a serious story. In Pride and Prejudice, if one of those girls isn't married off by the age of 24, by which time her bloom will be over, the family would be consigned to poverty. And in those days, poverty was starvation. And outside those lovely houses was mud and deprivation. And I thought if one was conscious of that, the tragedy or the high stakes, then the comedy of Pride and Prejudice would come out more, rather than it just being frothy comedy about a very silly woman trying to marry her girls off. She wasn't that silly. She was taking something seriously, which isn't a word that people apply to Mrs. Bennet. She had to take it seriously to save her family. And I think that's what makes Pride and Prejudice really a really good comedy, a profound comedy, and that's why people love it.
And along those lines, does comedy need to have a message, or can it be abstract?
No message. No message.
Yes, you're the one I was going to ask about this one.
No message at all. Obviously, my books are fairly political. In this book, America has only one party left, the bipartisan party. So, I'm very angry at American politics, Russian politics. Once I learn about the politics of India, I'm sure I'll be angry at them too. But I don't try to have a political message because I think the reader should find it for herself. Going back to this thing about tragedy, I was thinking about how when I was writing Absurdistan, which is my sort of most out there novel in terms of just using humor all the time, I spent a lot of time in Azerbaijan, Georgia, all these Soviet republics researching what would become Absurdistan. And a woman came up to me on a pier overlooking the Caspian Sea, and she offered me her daughter for $5. She offered me her daughter. And I was so mortified, and I thought, how can I write about this place when there's so much unbelievable suffering beyond anything I can imagine happening here, And I went to my hotel, and I threw out the discs I had written, and I said, I'm going home. I can't write about this. And then the next day, like every other writer, comic or not, you get up, and you start all over again, and you just work your way through it, whether it's funny or not.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, very briefly before we go on to questions, because I'm sure you're dying to ask questions from these three comedians here. Manu, in this order, what are your plans in terms of new books or whatever, and anything that you'd like to share with the audience, future
No, I
projects?
have nothing to share, but I was thinking this, you're asking if there is a message. And this is a question I think most writers grapple with, because message is usually such bad copy, and for my future work, I always wonder what I should do, why am I writing? And I have no idea, I'm envious of people who are very articulate about that. But I think I've accepted that, at least as far as journalism is concerned, I have to just accept that my message is very simply, why can't you be like me? I'm sure that's why most people write. Basically, what we are trying to say is, why can't you be more like me? I suppose I'm going to accept that. And I won't be defensive about that. And I will try to do something around that.
That's very good. Now, future stuff. Anyone would like to tell us?
Me?
Yes, Debbie?
Shall I start? Okay. Well, I've just written a novel called Heartbreak Hotel, which is coming out next month. And that is set again in a hotel, this time in Wales. And it's a sozzled old actor who can no longer get any acting jobs. And he takes over a bed and breakfast in Wales. But as those of you who've been to Wales know, it rains the entire time. So after breakfast, which is when, of course, people have to check out, nobody checks out because they all stand at the window saying, oh, it's chucking down. We were going to walk up Offa's Dyke today, but, oh, we can't go out in this. And our host, who's nothing if not a convivial fellow, invites them to stay in, and they drink his Rioja, and, well, pretty well drain the place dry. So he decides, this is the cunning bit, because I've got a bit of an entrepreneurial brain, and the outsourcing the elderly to India, I think is quite a good business idea. This is a long answer to his question, but he asked it. So he decides to turn it into a hotel so people will be there all the time. And he's a bit of a veteran of the old marriage go-round. He's had many wives and many children, so he knows all about relationships, and he knows that when relationships end, the skill that the other person has dies with them. Say you divide labor in a marriage or relationship. Somebody does the car, somebody does the household finance, somebody does the cooking. When you split up, you're helpless because you don't know how to do the car or whatever. So he's decided to run, in this hotel, courses for divorces. And I think it's a brilliant idea. Somebody must take it on. And so people come, they learn basic cookery, household finance or whatever. They're all on the rebound, so they all cop off with each other. And this is the most cunning thing of all. His hotel is falling to bits, rather like the best exotic marigold hotel. And so these people on the courses, they do up the hotel on the DIY course. They do all the cooking on the cookery course. They sort out the garden on the gardening course. They service his car on the basic car mechanics course. And they pay him for it. What's not to like?
Gary, what about you?
Yeah, I just finished a funny memoir about my horrible childhood. And it'll
The
be
first 7 years or after
the
that?
first 31 years.
Okay.
I just turned 40, so I feel like it's time for a memoir because Russian men live until 56 on average. So I have 16 years to get my affairs in order. So it should be out January 8th. Please buy it.
Watch out
I
for
need
that.
food. Yeah.
Manu, what about you?
Nothing planned, actually, yeah. But I know that I do plan to complete the 8th draft of my next novel the first time itself, you know. So I would ensure that whatever I write next, I'm not going to waste too much time on that.
Okay. Right, question time.
Hi. Okay, now you can hear me. This question is mostly for Deborah, but I was wondering if the characters that are portrayed in the movies, are they how you envisioned them when you wrote the book? Because that's how we see them is kind of through the film adaptation sometimes, but is that how you portrayed them, is how we see them?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think it applies to novelists as well, in a way that it helps to have somebody in mind. And if I'm writing either in a novel or in a screenplay, say a man in his 70s, I will have Michael Gambon in mind. Those of you who know Michael Gambon's face, he's a wonderful character actor, and his face can be anything. It's very protean. He can be sexy, he can be sinister, he can be nerdy, he can be innocent, he can be anything because he's an amazing actor. And I find, I don't know about my fellow novelists, that pinning up a photograph is incredibly useful, in screenplays particularly, because, rather like Gary was saying, you talk to them, and you can have the dialogue going, and by just looking at the face of the person, you know whether it's working or not. It's very odd, but you sort of do. Sometimes doing it in a mirror helps, as you do. So I think with novels and with screenplays, and the thing is with screenplays, it'll never be the actor, but they become your sort of ghostwriter when you're writing. They don't know anything about it, of course.
Hello, I would like to. This is a question for Manu Joseph. I read your first book 3 times at length and I took notes. I would like to understand better how you work. I was stricken in your book that you always have a kind of scientific approach. It's like sometimes a QCM, you ask questions which are very scientific. Do you check the answers? How do you work to check the knowledge which is behind that? I was stricken by all what you said about physics in your first book. It was very interesting, and I would like to know how you work.
I think most godless people go through a scientific phase, and so at some point I did, because that something has to save you, and you search for logic somewhere, you know. And most of philosophy around that time seemed meaningless and naive, you know. I think that's the influence of too much poetry, I suppose, and you begin to feel that philosophy by itself is something which is very naive, and only scientists are probably qualified to be philosophers anymore because they know more than you. And I was with the Times of India then, and it was a good opportunity for me to meet anybody I wanted, because if you say you're from Times of India, especially in Bombay, people meet you. And there was this wonderful place in Bombay called the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, where there were very, very serious men doing exotic things, chiefly theoretical physics. And I could just fix up appointments with them, claiming that I'm doing something for Times of India, which I did in some form. So I had this sudden access, and I used it, and I went there, and I met a lot of people, and so it verified a lot of questions, as you put it. It verified a lot of questions in my mind, but they were completely confused. They didn't understand why Times of India was interested in string theory. I think even Samir Jain was confused. There was a memo, it's like, why is this guy writing about things nobody wants to read? But I was doing it chiefly for my book. You know, I wanted to see what they had to say about some of the things I wanted to know.
Like to know of
We can't hear you.
in divide
Wha-
or comedies.
What is the role of autobiographical experiences
Yes.
in your experience
Yeah.
in your novel? So, who did you want to ask? All of them. Gary?
Everything I write is entirely taken from my life because I have no imagination and I really don't know other people. I'm very shy.
Does that answer your question? Anyone else?
How you make it tragedy or comedy to the kind of experiences that you had in life that determines whether it is good.
Oh, how is it determined if it's good? Well, the New York writers, we all have psychiatrists, so we tell the story first to the psychiatrist. It's the first audience. And when the psychiatrist laughs, you know it's good enough to be put into the book. When the psychiatrist cries, you know that your rates are about to go up. So you go back to humor. And then he laughs, and the rates go down. And when you've achieved about $150 per session, you know the book is ready to be published.
Next question.
Hello, this is a question for Debbie. Would you consider, given the lack of real comic writing or funny writing in India, would you like us to outsource the teaching of comic writing to you? And as a nod to your entrepreneurial brain, we could be writing the second and third drafts for you while we learned how to write funny.
I think you've answered your question.
So wait, the idea is to outsource Indian humor to America. right? You know, some of my best friends in America, oddly enough, are Indian writers. We have a little club called the Immigrants Club. It's Suketu Mehta, my best friend. I love him. Akhil Sharma, another very funny Indian. And then who else? So the other immigrants are me from Russia. We have one guy from Austria and somebody from Texas who's the real immigrant in New York. And those guys, Akhil and Suketu, are the funniest people I know. I mean, they write about these horrible things, but their humor reminds me so much of Soviet Jewish humor, which is humor from the edge of the grave. You know, you don't just stab somebody with your humor, you turn the knife and turn it and turn it. And that's something India does very well. So yes, I will accept your commercial proposition.
This is Manu, a little bit of tragedy in my life. The book, I was reading your book, maybe 55 pages, definitely read about Toma Charco, left it behind on an Air France flight. Somebody, that flight is dying of laughter.
I don't think the French laugh at all from my experience.
Good afternoon. I must say it's a delight to hear all three of you. My question to you is, do you ever laugh in your dreams? Are you inspired by a scene or something that you could not possibly work out while you are awake? Do you get the answer to that funny scene in your dream? And I would particularly like to ask Gary, does your Korean wife ever hear you laugh in your dreams?
Do you laugh in your dreams?
No, I stay away from people who laugh in their dreams. You know, I like normal people.
Debbie, do you laugh in your dreams?
No, because dreams are too weird to be funny. I think real humour is rooted in reality, and my dreams are just too awful to laugh at.
Gosh, tell us.
So I did dream the Barkadat saying that she's just gullible, and I was just laughing. I remember that one bit.
This question is for Gary. You mentioned that you have there are 600,000 readers in the U.S. and 17 million writers. With the proliferation of things like Reddit and other digital distribution mechanisms, I mean, I take a little bit of issue with that because I mean, readership may be alive and well in different forms. I mean, would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, well, you mean the Kindle and stuff like that, right? Electronic fiction.
Actually, yeah, but Reddit, fan fiction. You know, there's an interesting story about a science manual writer in Iowa who's just writing a screenplay about this about the 65th Battalion that's been transported to Bagram, from Bagram to the 3rd century AD, and it all started as a Reddit chain. So it's, you know, technology as sort of changing the way that, you know, comedy and you know, books are disseminated.
I hear what you're saying. It's an interesting question, and the biggest thing in America are called the MFAs, Master of Fine Arts programs in writing, where we charge you $50,000 a year to become the next Hemingway. They're wonderful. I teach at one at Columbia. Please, if you have $50,000, come join me. In terms of the electronic aspect of fiction, I understand the wonderful interactivity of it. I understand how well it works, and I understand it's wonderful for people. It's just not for me, because being a very old-fashioned, almost 19th century person, what I love about a book is the technology of closure. There is nothing going on but me and this book. And when I open a book and start reading about it, let's say I'm reading about a Sri Lankan cab driver in London or something like that, for a while, whether I love or hate that person, it's like a Vulcan mind meld. I become that person. It's the highest form of technology, and I don't think you need computers or anything to do it. You pick up a book, and for 300 pages, you're living in somebody else's mind. And that kind of empathy, how do you beat that with technology?
Hi, back here. My name is Anis, and I was wondering about a couple of things. One, you're all from very different backgrounds. So how do you write so that it is appealing to a wider demographic across the world? One. And two, how does this fiction translate across so many decades? Like Woodhouse, as Debbie mentioned, Woodhouse, is he still appealing to today's readers, and how does that work out? And do you try to bring out such elements in your writing?
In other words, will you last? Who would like to take this question?
Well, I didn't hear the second half, but the first half was really interesting about whether humour travels. And I think it's really true. I think that a lot of my books don't do at all well in America. I'm absolutely hopeless there. I mean, I think I've made a record of one of them selling 600 copies in paperback in the whole of America.
I'm so sorry. I'll buy your books. I'll buy all of them.
It's just that my humour doesn't travel at all in that day. I hope it goes better to India. But I think that the more forensically it hits the spot in a country, in a way, the better. And I think if one tries to bland out your writing to appeal to a whole demographic across the world, it will become a bit like tofu or curd. It won't have any taste. And I think one shouldn't write thinking of that anyway. You should, whatever we write for, I mean, it's an interesting question, all the writers here and all of you, whether you write for the person like you can't sort of spread it around and preempt it thinking of other cultures, do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there are incredible, obviously, cultural differences even within Europe. So I write about, families that are way too close to each other with very domineering mothers. So they're big sellers in Italy, of course. But in Sweden, not at all. So it really depends on, and humor is very difficult to translate because a lot of the jokes are very topical and involved, and that's going back to the other question of whether one will survive. It's interesting because the world is so fragmented that it's very hard to have a book that can really make a difference across the whole world. Often the simplicity of language, which I certainly, my books have a complexity to it, but writing good, simple prose, I think, is more helpful to posterity's sake. Some writers like, what's the writer in, I always forget his name, in Japan, Narishiguro, Murakami. Murakami's prose, which is very complex, but is written in a simple way that's very easily translatable, I think that has a very good chance of being spread across the entire world and surviving. But I have no survival capacity, no.
Hi, as teachers, how do you teach humor? As teachers, how do you teach humor? Both of us have students and maybe some of us don't have a really well-developed sense of humor. How do you teach humor?
Who would like to take this one? Gary?
You can't teach humor. It's impossible. Often I make my students cry. And then the next step is a very funny piece. So you have to tear them apart and then build them together, build them up again in a form of your own choosing. It's very totalitarian.
And I think that just about wraps it up. Thank you very much indeed for listening to Deborah, Gary, and Manu. And read their books.
Thank you.
Many thanks for that most entertaining session, Manu, Gary, and Deborah. Please note I've avoided saying out your surnames, your unpronounceable surnames. And Ashok for some excellent moderating. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the authors will be available for book signing next to the bookstore. Please buy their books and get them signed. Thank you.